Zillow says the typical down payment is between 3 and 20%, with average home prices over $320,000. That means most potential home buyers need between $10,000 and $60,000 saved up. Here is some advice on how you can boost your savings. We've got David and John Auten-Schneider, the debt-free guys and co-hosts of Living Not So Fabulously. Guys, a pleasure to see both of you. John, let's start with you. What is the biggest way that you want to advise folks listening to reduce their expenses?
Yeah, you just had several guests in a row talk about how everything is getting more expensive for the American consumer. So some of these tips might have been unheard of even 3 months ago, but they're becoming more common today. One advice we have is that you move in with friends or family to offset some of your costs. We have 2 clients who've actually done this. One client of ours was able to save over $10,000 in 1 year by living with his mom and dad. Another recommendation that we have is maybe it's a tight market in most of the country, maybe not in the South or Florida, but now might be a good time to consider selling your current home, putting as much of that profit into a high-yield savings account, and waiting until later when you can either buy a bigger home or when the opportunity is more appropriate for you and your family to buy the right size home. In the meantime, maybe live with mom and dad, or maybe downsize to something smaller. And then a third suggestion is maybe looking at some of those things that were luxuries once upon a time, maybe cutting those out, like DoorDash and Instacart subscriptions. We're paying anywhere up to $924 a year in subscription services alone.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I always tell people to look at their biggest buckets of expenses and how they can cut that if they're trying to save. So I'm glad that you brought up the great point about housing costs. David, what are you looking at in terms of some ways to save up extra money?
So one of the things is that now is the opportunity, especially with the gig economy, for folks to figure out ways in which they can earn just a little bit of extra money. We're seeing a lot of individuals who are wanting to either pay off debt or are trying to save for a down payment are doing things like freelancing or starting a side gig. We actually know clients of ours who they pet sit through Rover on the weekend and are making somewhere between a couple of hundred to over $1,000 a month. That helps them save for that down payment. The other thing is that if you're getting ready to move, you probably have a lot of stuff you don't necessarily need anymore. So go out on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, places like that. Start selling the stuff that you aren't using and put that money aside for your down payment.
Yeah, it's a really great point too. And John, I know you're also monitoring some personal accounting changes you can make so that you can maximize your saving. I love the sound of that. What does that look like?
Yeah, one suggestion is you can adjust your W-4 so that you get more money every paycheck, twice a month or every other week, have you. Just remember that you might have a little different tax bill come the end of the year, so you definitely want to make sure you do the math to make sure it makes sense for you, as well as talking to an accountant. Also, do a strategy that we call send it before you spend it. As soon as your paycheck comes in, go ahead and pay whatever bills you have to pay within that duration of your pay period so that you don't think that you have extra money around that you don't necessarily have to spend. And then finally, there are some amazing cash back and rewards credit cards out there right now. Take advantage of those to the extent that you're able to, but make sure that you remember that somebody's subsidizing all those rewards and you don't want that to be you. So pay your credit card off every single month.
I love that. So well said. David, I also want to get your take just on how much money you should think about having saved before you even pursue the idea of buying a home. What's a good kind of range?
Yeah, I think this really depends. You showed a stat earlier, anywhere between 3 and 20%. But if you're using one of the local or national programs that are for down payment assistance, then look for the guidance that those programs actually provide. In some cases, you may not have to have a down payment at all, depending on that program. If you are looking for a conventional loan, then please find a qualified mortgage broker, whether that be through your local bank, credit union, or even an independent individual. They're going to be able to not only find you the best rate, but they're also going to help match up that down payment to your particular financial needs. But keep in mind that just because they say you can afford it doesn't necessarily mean that you can. We want to keep in mind that there are also other expenses related to owning a home. Insurance is one of the big ones right now that is being talked about, and as you mentioned, in Florida and in the South, especially because of natural disasters.
Yeah, it's important to look at the totality of those costs. A lot to think about. I will continue to be renting in my New York City apartment until I retire and move to Florida someday. But you guys give me hope that I can do it. So thank you so much, John and David. I really appreciate you guys. Thank you. And you can listen to new episodes of Living Not So Fabulously Wednesdays at noon, every single Wednesday at noon Eastern Time.